But we're joined now by Mark Short, former Chief of Staff to former Vice President Mike Pence. So, Mark, talk to us about what you see as the political fallout from the kind of testimony that you're going to hear based on the opening statements. It's rather salacious. It's, at least from the prosecution side, the allegations about past behaviors, and also what we heard from the judge today, leaving it up to the judge's discretion. That was a pretrial motion that he decided today. He at least said, you know, if Mr. Trump wants to testify, that's, you know, up to him. But there was a caution flag there because he was saying that any one of 6 or maybe all 6 legal proceedings against him that have been completed, civil proceedings before this one, could come into play. And if he does testify, then that's fair game for the prosecution. He will make those decisions one by one when it comes up. But the jury potentially could hear all of that, you know, all of the past, the damage suits, what he's been paying, sexual behaviors that have been alleged and proved to the satisfaction of a judge. Mark?
Well, Andrew, thanks for having me. I think the reality is that most of America is so polarized at this point. There's really little undecided as far as our electorate. I do think there's a question, though, when the vast majority of the American people do not like either option, there's a question of what actually motivates people to turn out. And I think that for many Republican core voters, they feel like these 2 New York cases are so frivolous and it's unfair, the political prosecution, that it motivates them to turn out. But as far as expanding beyond that, I think, as you said, the sordid nature of this certainly doesn't help the former president. And I think, furthermore, the reality of him being seen in this venue is rather diminishing. I think the former president is used to controlling so much of his own environment, even to the extent of camera angles and lighting. And the fact that he controls none of that in this courtroom, I think, can be diminishing. And so at the end of the day, I don't think it's a net plus for gaining new voters. But at the same time, perhaps it energizes some who may be Republican voters who perhaps are still on the fence. But I think that's a pretty small sliver at this point.
A lot of these folks who are going to be testifying are people who I think if you have an understanding of the case, each of them fits into the puzzle, right? They all buttress, at least from the prosecution's point of view, the original statement that they made about why this is actually a case that's worthy of prosecuting. But it can be a double-edged sword, right? So many of these people were folks who were close to Donald Trump, maybe a few who still are. People who would not be comfortable saying negative things about him. And yet there's a line. And your old boss found a line. Somebody who had been a very faithful vice president, somebody who defended Donald Trump, but decided after January 6th there was a line he could not cross. Well, actually, on January 6th, a line that he could not cross. What is it for these folks? It's never fun to be a witness in a trial, let alone what some people are calling the trial of the century. What's it like to be that person who really supported Donald Trump, believed in Donald Trump, but now has to be a witness for the prosecution? Do you imagine?
Well, I don't know that it's going to be much fun for anybody who's in that seat. I do think there's a dramatic distinction, though, between believing you're upholding your oath to the Constitution versus, I think, those who are caught up in this case over affairs that are far more sordid. And I still think that from the prosecution's perspective, it is important to remember the previous district attorney passed on opportunity to bring this case. And I think the lead witnesses, as you've said, are somebody who's in charge of a gossip magazine and somebody else who's been convicted of lying to Congress. And so I do still think that there's going to be, for a lot of people, there's a sense of, is this really what you're going to prosecute a former president on? I think there's more legal liability on the federal cases, and there's obviously a big hearing coming up in front of the Supreme Court later this week on that front. But again, politically, I'm not so sure how much there's that many undecided voters at this point.
Mark, take us behind the scenes, though. You know, your former boss made a decision that there are certain things that he could not put up with. One thing, that his life was threatened, his family was put in danger, and there was that little thing about trying to stop the election count. But you have, you know, the former Attorney General and other very close insiders, cabinet members, who described Donald Trump in the worst, you know, terrible terms after January 6th, and now say, yeah, I'll vote for him because he's a Republican and he's better than Joe Biden. Just explain how you can be so disparaging of the morality, the character of a candidate, of a politician, of a man, and then say, yeah, but I'll vote for him?
Well, I mean, I think it's hard for me to put myself in their shoes. I don't know that I necessarily feel the same way. I do think for the former vice president, there was less of a sense of that personality that perhaps some other cabinet members have expressed concerns about. I think for the former vice president, it came down to, I swore an oath to defend the Constitution, and that's where my allegiance lies. And it was pretty much as simple as that. Since that day, Andrea, I think that the split is more profound because the policies that President Trump governed on for 4 years, he's walked away from, whether or not it's on foreign policy or whether or not it's on things like TikTok or things like life. And so I think those are essential principles for most conservatives. I think that's what's driving the wedge between the former vice president. As far as some of the other cabinet officials who express such concern about his behavior and characteristics, but still say, you know, ultimately at the end of the day, I'm going to vote for him relative to Biden, I think there is a concern about the trajectory of our country. And the reality is that I don't think they're alone in that. I think that about 70% of the American people are unhappy with both options. And so there's a lot of people who I think, unfortunately, are making a decision of the lesser of two evils, as opposed to feeling like this is really who I think should be the leader of the free world.
And I just want to ask you to explain to people who would not know this, and you were right in the West Wing, and that's a very small quarter. Madeleine Westerhout, who is the gatekeeper, the chief of staff of the Oval Office, if you will, knowing everyone who comes in, who goes out. She's a potential witness for the prosecution. And tell us what she would know. For instance, she would know if David Pecker and Michael Cohen were in the Oval Office talking to Donald Trump, and she were on duty that day, correct? I mean, she would have to be aware. Might she know something about those checks that he signed with this, with, you know, the very prominent signature?
I can't attest.
But
I can't attest what she knows something about the checks. But
I'm just saying,
you're right. She certainly had the proximity. She would have sat right outside the president's office. And the reality was that Donald Trump was his own chief of staff. And so the person who was in that seat obviously did have a lot of say and flow in and out of the office. I think certainly at the end of the administration, one of our challenges was that there was not much of a gatekeeper there to control what legal advice the former president was receiving. But certainly Madeleine or Molly Michael after her would have been in a position to be aware of that.
Let me just clarify before I lose you. Her desk would be right outside. She would know who goes in and who goes out.
The physical location would have been that she was right outside and everyone would have come past her desk. Yes, Andrea.
Thanks so much, Mark Short.
Hey everyone, MSNBC has a new and improved app. You'll get real-time alerts and analysis, live blogs, in-depth essays, video highlights, and the best 2024 election coverage. Download the new MSNBC app. Here's how to do it. You tap on the App Store on your phone. You hit search on the bottom right corner. You type in MSNBC. You click on the MSNBC app. You click on Get or the cloud icon and enjoy it.